Welcome, listeners, to A Writer's Life. I'm your host, Heike Bohm, the author of the novel Secrets in the Shadows. A Writer's Life is a place where I'll be in conversation with fellow writers. We'll discuss all things writing. They'll read from their latest works, and we'll explore what happens beyond the pen in A Writer's Life. It's gonna be a page turner. I just know it. Pull up a chair and join us. I'm recording on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation.
The last few years, I have been the Vancouver mentor for a program called the Shoe Project.
Oh, wow.
So this is a program that runs across Canada that brings together a cohort of immigrant and refugee women who all craft a story about their journey to Canada around the central metaphor of a pair of shoes.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of A Writer's Life. My next guest, I first met through a writing course I took at SFU. And I must say, not only is she an amazing writer, but she's an incredible teacher. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be in conversation with Caroline Adderson, who is the author of 5 novels, A History of Forgetting, Sitting Practice, The Sky is Falling, Ellen in Pieces, A Russian Sister, 2 collection of short stories, Bad Imaginings, Pleased to Meet You, as well as many books for young readers. She's also the editor and co-contributor of a nonfiction book of essay and photographs, Vancouver Vanishes, Narrative of Demolition and Revival, and guest editor of Best Canadian Stories 2019. Her work has received numerous award nominations, including the Sunday Times EFG Private Bank Short Story Award, the International Impact Dublin Literary Award, 2 Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Governors General's Literary Award, the Rogers Trust Fiction Prize, and the Scotia Bank Giller Prize long list. In 2017, she was a YWCA Woman of Distinction Award for Arts, Culture, and Design nominee. Her awards include 3 BC Book Prizes, 3 CBC Literary Awards, the Marion Engel Award for Mid-Career Achievement, and a National Magazine Award Gold Medal for Fiction. She teaches in the Writing and Publishing program at SFU and is the program director of the Writing Studio at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. Welcome, Caroline, to A Writer's Life.
Hi.
That's quite the achievement. It's really impressive.
Yes. Well, over the years, I've been writing a long time and they add up here and there, sprinkled through. Still wonderful when it happens and still terribly discouraging when it doesn't. Never changes.
Where were you born and what was it like around your dinner table when you were growing up?
I grew up in Alberta. I should say that I'm now located in Vancouver, which is on the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. So I was born in Edmonton, and I grew up in a little town called Sherwood Park. It wasn't even really a town. I call it the armpit of Alberta. It was, a little bedroom community, and my father was an engineer, a chemical engineer. So there was a big chemical plant there spewing out stuff. Yeah, it was very culturalist place, and I couldn't wait to leave. Yeah,
Wow.
I couldn't wait. I have a sister, a mother, a father. Dinner was strained, I'll say. Yeah, it was. In fact, my father, many, many years later, just a few years before he died, he was actually diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome.
Wow.
So he was a very, very quiet man. And my mother had to double her volume to make up for that. And, the usual sisters, mothers, daughters thing going on. But my mother loved to read. And so I did end up reading a lot, probably thanks to her. Yeah.
What were some of your favorite books you read as a child?
Well, I remember loving as a very young child, Harriet the Spy. I remember my mother reading the Golden Book of Poetry to me. I loved I loved anything gothic and gruesome. I was quite drawn to the illustrations. So in that Golden Book of Poetry, there's this horrifying poem called The Inchcape Rock, which is about this rock in the ocean that had a bell attached to it, and some evil sailor removed the bell, and then his own ship smashed into it, and they all perished. And then the illustration was this bloody hand rising out of the water. I remember, as like 6 years old and being just fascinated and thrilled by this horrifying drawing. And then as I got older, I was quite interested in adult literature early. So I discovered the Russians on my parents' bookshelf. I read the Crime and Punishment when I was a teenager, and Hemingway, and anything that was there I read.
Do you remember the moment in your life when you knew you were going to be a writer?
No, it came to me accidentally. When I grew up, so this was in the 1970s, there weren't any Canadian writers that I knew of. It just wasn't something that Canadians did. Everybody would have been British or American or certainly dead. It just never struck me as a real job. It still doesn't strike me as a real job, I have to say. But I always liked writing. I wrote for pleasure in school, and I always was a very good letter writer. But I never intended, even when I went to university, to become a writer. I actually fell into creative writing by chance. I had a roommate who sort of bragged that he was going to get a story published in the New Yorker. And I had a little quarrel going with him because he hated my cat and was mean to him. So I thought, I'm going to apply for creative writing and show him. And in fact, I did. And then I got in. And so I ended up switching minor I got a teaching degree, and my minor, I switched to creative writing. And that's the only reason I did it. And I still had absolutely no intention of becoming a writer. My intention was to become an elementary school teacher. And that's what I graduated with. But I had an excellent professor, Andreas Schroeder, and he really encouraged me. And I actually won a contest when I was still in university, and I had some stories published. And when I was graduating, he actually, and this is why I became a writer, he led me to the office, I think on the last day of class, and said, you should apply for Canada Council grant. And I didn't even know what that was. So for anybody who's listening who's not from Canada, that's the national arts funding organization. So at that time, they had grants for people who were not really practicing artists, that just were kind of dabbling. So it was called Explorations. So I applied for this grant and I got it. And so my first job out of university was to write a book. And that's why I became a writer, because the Canada Council gave me some money, and I actually approached it like a job, 9 to 5, which of course is a ridiculous way to write anything. But what it did was it gave me the sense of discipline, that I actually sat there for all those hours and I wrote a lot of terrible, terrible, terrible stuff, which you have to do. You have an apprenticeship period. And then when I finished and I supposedly wrote this book, it was terrible and nobody would publish it, thank goodness. And then I had to say to myself, oh, I can stop now or I can keep going. And I decided I would keep going. And I actually applied to go to the Banff Centre, because I was at that time back in Alberta. So that's the program that I actually run now. I went there as a 21-year-old young woman with a clutch of terrible stories, and it transformed my life.
So what was your first piece of writing you did have published, and who was the publisher?
I wrote a terrible story for that contest I mentioned, one of these hokey contests. It was put on by the Commissioner of National Languages. And it had a theme, living in a bilingual country. So like right away it screams, got to be horrible. So I wrote a story and I was one of the winners, but there were lots of winners. So, and it was for young people. A group of us were sent off. Believe it or not, this is how much money they had back then. In those days, this was in the early mid 1980s. They took us to Ottawa and we met the Governor General. And then our stories were all published. Half of us were French and half of us were English. And our stories were published in this special magazine that I'm sure the government foisted on everybody. Really appalling. So that was the first thing. And then I published some also terrible stories in small literary magazines. So the usual trajectory, you publish bad stories and then you start publishing good stories, and eventually 10 years or 10,000 hours of apprenticeship is complete and you actually start writing good things.
So true. Okay, but back to that first story. Did it have a bloody hand in it that came out of the water?
No, no, I can barely remember it. It was about some French girl going to an English place or something. It was dreadful.
You
Yeah.
teach creative writing. And when I was in one of your writing class at SFU, I couldn't help but be amazed at your ability to actually dissect a story and teach how to write it. And basically you deconstructed it and put it back together. And I'd never really had anybody teach that to me. And you did that so effortlessly. Had you always wanted to be a teacher?
From early adulthood, yes. Originally, I wanted to be a visual artist. And I actually got accepted to the U of A in the Faculty of Arts. And then I went off on this program called Katimavik, where I went traveling around the country. And then I became a peace activist, very much wanted to save the world. And so I thought I should become an educator so that I could.
That's the best way to do it.
That's right. So, I'm very grateful. I actually have a teaching degree, and I'm also grateful it's an elementary teaching degree because they really do teach you how to teach when you get an elementary teaching degree. But I'm very glad that you said that about that class. So in the class, which is called Fiction Series for the Weekend Student, one of my aims is to teach writers how to read like a writer. So to read not like a reader reading for pleasure, and not like a literary critic or a cultural critic, like not the kind of reading you get in university where you're dissecting themes. It's really like, how does a writer put a story together? And so the book I use is Alice Munro's Runaway. I've read those stories. The reason I do it effortlessly is I've read the stories, 25 times, and still getting new things out of them, and still learning from the perceptions of the students. Students will point something out, and, even after 25 readings, I didn't see that. So because she's a genius and the stories are so great. But people complain. They complain about that aspect of it. It's too hard, etc. But, as I go on, I have to dig my heels in and resist the complaints, because I really think it's important, if you want to be a writer, that you learn how to read, because that's really how you learn. You don't learn in a creative writing class. You learn by reading and by writing.
English is my second language, and you were an ESL teacher. You must have connected with so many different cultures and people. Did that influence any of your character development at all through your novels, just coming across so many different cultures and people?
Yeah, I don't think it could help but do that. Yeah, I taught ESL for 12 years. In fact, now for the last few years, I have been the Vancouver mentor for a program called the Shoe Project.
Oh, wow.
So this is a program that runs across Canada that brings together a cohort of immigrant and refugee women who all craft a story about their journey to Canada around the central metaphor of a pair of shoes. So I am the writing coach for that program, and then they move on and they work with acting voice coaches, and then there's an actual public performance. So I've continued to work with people from other parts of the world, and most recently, those women have been so inspiring to me. I would be sitting in the classroom with them, and the things that they have experienced, I'm just full of such awe for what they've gone through to get here, and how incredibly brave they are, and the sacrifices they make for their families and for their children. And yeah, it's something I'm quite committed to, and that I feel very strongly that we're always helping these these people we're as if they need our charity, but you know,
Yeah.
they could help us. Every single one of those women, two of them that I still work with quite a lot now. I'm mentoring one, and she helped start the first television station in Eritrea, and she's a care home worker now. And she should
Right.
be lecturing at university in the School of
Yeah.
Journalism. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
They should be helping us because very few Canadians would have the kind of experience that she had. But for some reason, we can't seem to make that step. I'm committed to doing that. And whether that gets into my work, that's a tricky question at the moment, because there's all this, dancing around voice
Right.
appropriation and to bring other people from other cultures into the work has to be done sensitively. And in fact, I was very moved with my writing for children, to say something about the refugee crisis. And so I finally got the solution to that problem. I'm working on a novel, a middle grade novel about the Lisbon Doll Hospital. So it's about refugee
Oh,
dolls, which of course stand in for the children. But that's how I figured out I could actually appropriately write about
wow.
about the situation.
Nice work you're
Yeah.
doing. It's really inspiring. Really
Thank
inspiring.
you. Well, they're inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. You are also, you had mentioned earlier, the program director of the Writer Studio at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. Can you talk about that program a bit?
Sure. I mentioned that I was a participant in that program. I was a participant twice, actually. So I'm incredibly honored to have taken over as director, which I did 3 years ago. So it takes place at the Banff Centre, which is an arts institution in the Rockies in the town of Banff for more than 50 years, I think. And the writing studio is quite different from other writing programs. It's not workshops. It's like half retreat, half mentorship. So we bring in a guest faculty. We have a core faculty, which is me, Cheyenne Salvadore, and we are the director of the studio, and he's the associate director of narrative. And then Karen Soley is the associate director of poetry. So we have 15 poets and 15 narrative writers, and they are assigned mentors to work with if they choose to, but they can just come and write. And it's 5 weeks, and it's very unstructured. We just have things like readings, and we have a salon where people can come and bring their craft questions and talk. But basically, it's just living together as a community and a cohort, and working and getting some feedback on the work if you want it. It's not obligatory. And so we get faculty, international faculty, and we get people from all over the world applying. It's wonderful. We had to run online this year. Previous year it was canceled because of the pandemic, but wonderful, life-changing program, as I can
Mhm.
attest, having been through it myself.
Your latest novel, A Russian Sister, is a 19th century Russian tragic comedy. Can you describe the novel a bit?
So this is the true story of how Anton Chekhov came to write his breakthrough play, The Seagull. And it's structured rather like The Seagull in that it's got 4 acts. And it's told from the point of view of his sister, Mashka. I came upon this novel kind of circuitously. I've had a, pretty bad crush on Chekhov my whole adult reading life. In 2010, I wrote a novel called The Sky is Falling, which is the only thing I've written that's even remotely autobiographical. It was about the fear of nuclear war and the love of Russian literature. So it was set during the 1980s and during the arms race. And at the time, I mentioned that I was a peace activist. So it was set at that time and then alternating back and forth. And the central character had studied Russian literature and Russian language, as I did, though I didn't study Russian language, just literature and history at UBC. I had quite a lot about Chekhov in there, also other Russian writers, but a lot about Chekhov in there. He's kind of took over the whole thing. And then in my previous novel, Ellen the Pieces, I had another chapter that was all about her reading Lady with a Lap Dog when she gets a dog by accident. And then I started to realize, I'm just going to keep doing this Chekhov thing if I don't really, really, really just get it out of my system. So that's why I decided to write a book, an actual novel about Chekhov. And originally I thought I was going to write the story of how this man who was, gorgeous and everyone was in love with him and he slept with everybody. Why 3 years before he died, he got married and then he never lived with the woman. And so that's what I thought I was going to write about. And I went to Russia to do the research.
Oh, wow.
But then I realized that would be a novel about a dying man in a boring seaside town quarreling with his female relatives, that there would be very little outward action. But by then I had found this true story. So if you know this, if you remember the play, The Seagull, and you don't have to know the play, The Seagull, to read and get the book or enjoy the novel. In the story, there's a character called Nina, and she falls in love with this famous writer, and they run off together, and he gets her pregnant, and then he abandons her, and she has the baby, and then the baby dies. So the same thing happened to this young woman called Lika Mizanova. She was mad. She was a friend of Chekhov's sister, Masha, madly in love with Chekhov. They had a years-long, serious flirtation. And finally they got together and he dumped her. That was his pattern. He was unable, I think, to tolerate emotional closeness. He saved that for his writing. And there's lots of reasons for that, which are posited by the novel. Then he passed her on when she was heartbroken to the actual cad, who then got her pregnant and abandoned her. So it's a very interesting story. And one of the really shocking things about the story is that he finally wrote a successful play by just taking Lika's life and putting it on the stage. And she came to see it, even though he tried to stop her from coming. She came to see it and wasn't terribly pleased about it. But her child hadn't died. But 3 weeks later, she did. She died 3 weeks after the premiere of The Seagull.
Oh, wow.
So I just thought, oh my God, this young woman watched, her life played before her eyes, and her child dies in the play, and then her child really dies. It just seemed too much to bear. I just couldn't believe nobody had written this story before. So I wrote it. Yes. So that's what it's about.
Would you delight us and read an excerpt from A Russian Sister?
Sure, I will. Okay. I've got a long preamble to this, just because it's sort of in the middle. So as I said, it's from Masha's point of view, and there's a lot of reasons I chose Masha's point of view. I got very interested in her because she actually herself received 4 proposals of marriage, all of which Chekhov, she referred them to her brother, and he didn't say you can't marry this guy, but he expressed disapproval. So she never did marry, and she in fact spent her whole life. She died much late. She died in her 90s, and he died at the age of 43. And she spent her whole life in his service, really. And though she was quite a good painter herself and very intelligent, and I think quite stymied by the time, he had a lot of affairs with her friends. So I was very interested in that relationship. How did she feel about that? And the whole thing was kind of weird and intriguing. So that's why I picked her point of view. Also, I tried to write in Chekhov's point of view, and it was just awful. So I'm going to read to you a section. It takes place in 1890. At that time, Chekhov went to Sakhalin Island, which was a notorious penal colony in an island north of Japan, off the coast of Siberia. And that was where they sent prisoners. And no person who was not involved with the government, no writer, no investigator of any kind had ever set foot on that island. He didn't even have permission. So he went there. It was a very grueling trip. The year before, his brother Kolya had died of tuberculosis, which Chekhov also had, and alcoholism. He died in this place in Ukraine where they would go for the summer. The previous 2 summers, they went to this place called Luka. So on the 3rd summer, Chekhov has gone to Sakhalin Island, and Masha and her mother go to Luka because the brother Kolya is buried there, and they have to observe some religious rites around the first anniversary of his death. So they go there. The family that owns the Dutch are friends of the Chekhovs, but most of them are away with the exception of the mother and the youngest brother, Georgie. And he's a pianist. So in the absence of everyone else, Masha and Georgie, who have not previously been friends, start spending a lot of time together and getting closer and closer. And the previous day, they have a conversation, and Georgie lets out that the previous year she was going to receive a proposal from this man called Mr. Smagin. So that stirred up. He finds out that Antosha, that's her brother, Anton Chekhov, kind of put him off. And so this stirs up some bitterness about these previous proposals that got put off. She's also falling in love with Georgie, and she doesn't at this point realize it. So I'm going to read this scene. This is after they've had this conversation. That night, she tossed in the heat, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about her conversation with Georgie, the painful places he touched, and the comfort he'd given. Lieutenant Igorov. Georgie hadn't named him, of course. He didn't know about him. That summer, when Masha was 20, 3 officers used to visit, men who got on well with her brothers. Igorov was the only one she could still picture. He talked endlessly about resigning from the army and doing something useful instead. He came from the gentry and felt guilty for it. Every time he quaffed a drink, he'd say, "I'm not a good soldier. I'm not even good looking." About his soldiering abilities, she was ignorant, but the latter was true. He shone with boldness, though his eyes were striking. He had a habit of looking straight at her, then blinking rapidly, as though he'd seen something astonishing. She was young enough then to find myopia flattering. Once, in front of everyone, Igorov said, "Anton, your sister's so stern. Let's see if I can make her laugh. Come here, Maria. I want to show you something." An arm around her shoulder, he brought his finger to her face, closer and closer until her eyes crossed. She thought it must have been some tiny speck that he wanted her to see. A freckle? "What is it?" she asked. "What is it?" "It's a finger." She did laugh then, along with everyone else. After that, every time she saw him, he'd hold up his finger and crook it, which quickly grew tiresome. One day there was a party at one of the estates. They all went. Masha was depressed about something. So when the dancing began, she slipped into the library to read. Igorov came and found her. "Here you are." She refused to lift her face in case he showed her that finger of his, and she had to throw the book at him. He started on again about giving up the army. "What kind of work do you think would most suit a man like me?" "I have no idea." She was pretending to be absorbed by the story. A window must have been open. She remembered the scent of lilacs in the room. "If you do come up with something, would you let me know? And would you, by any chance, marry me?" She looked up then. He was blinking fast. Taken aback, she could think of nothing to say but, "Father's in Moscow working at the warehouse. You'll have to speak to my brother." A smile spread over his face, reminding her of a baby playing magpie. "Kolya?" he asked, Kolya being the eldest present. "Anton." Kolya would marry her to a peddler if one happened by. Igorov thanked her with a bow and hurried off, presumably to find Antosha. Once the surprise wore off, flattery took over. By the time she left the library, her blindsided heart was aflutter. What happened after that, she never found out. Ever since, a bad feeling attached itself to his name. She should have cleared up the matter with Natasha years ago, but was too embarrassed. Besides, if she did, there would be no feeling whatsoever. She got up and went out to the veranda to cool off, pulling the sheet off the bed as she went. What time was it? The moon told her nothing. Georgie was still awake. She could hear him playing in the manor house across the orchard. What had he meant when he said he was glad that the others weren't there? She settled in the hammock, shrouded in the linen sheet, listening to Georgie start and stop, rocking herself with one foot, back and forth. Her skin felt tacky, like the piano's notes were sticking to it. Back and forth. Eventually, Georgie gave up and came out on the terrace, and for a long time stood in the moonlight, just like in one of Natasha's stories. So many moons to be gazed at, so many lonely, stifled people. Was she seeing him or reading this? The orchard was laden now with fruit. Yesterday, Elena had asked Georgie to play a mazurka that might scare off the birds. Footsteps sounded on the path, or was she imagining it? Back and forth. Did he even know she was here? She stopped rocking. Yes, he was beside her now. She sensed his heat, smelled the dogs on his hands, bending over her close enough that the loose fabric of his shirt brushed her face. He whispered, "You're dreaming, Masha."
Great. Loved it.
Thank
Who
you.
was your favorite character to write in this book?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, Svolach the mongoose. So when Chekhov came back from Sakhalin Island, he took a boat. And he went kind of by horse and buggy and part way by train. And then when the train track ended, by horse and cart and up the river. But coming back, he took a boat and went all the way through past Japan and then through the sea route all the way to Odessa. And so he stopped in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. And in the roadside market, he bought 2 mongooses. Well, one turned out to be a civet cat, but he thought they were both mongooses. So he brought these mongooses home. And in fact, Svolach, the mongoose, becomes one of Masha's significant love interests in the book. But it was lots of fun having an animal character, and he plays quite an important role in the story.
Wow. Who was your character that gave you the hardest time to write?
Well, I have to say, at first it was Masha, and it wasn't her fault. It was the fault of the fact that this is the first time I've written a book that is, I won't say historical. It's though people call it a historical novel because it's set in the 19th century, but it's actually a biographical novel. And everything in the novel, as I mentioned, is true. I didn't want anything in it to be made up. So it's not one of those books where I imagine what it would be like if this happened or if that happened. Mm-hmm. Every single thing that happens in the novel actually happened. I only played a little bit with the order of some things. And of course, I had to cut tons of things out. But it's the first time I've ever written about real, actual people. And so daunted by that, I kept thinking, what if it's not like, what if they're not really like this? And what if they could read over my shoulder? And what will people who love Chekhov say about this? And what will academics say? So I felt quite hamstrung, and many, like 5 of the drafts, essentially biography. And in fact, I ran into a friend and I was talking about my problems. And that's what he said to me. He said, well, it's a novel, it's not biography. And then I realized the problem was I hadn't opened my heart to Masha and let her see and feel things. So that's imagined. Her thoughts and everything that happens is true, but her thoughts and feelings about things are imaginary. But it took me a long time to give myself the permission to do that. And it happened when I realized that even though everything that happened in this book is true, there's still fictional characters, because you can't transpose a real person into a book. Real people don't behave by the rules of fiction. So once they entered a novel, they became fictional characters despite their resemblance to real life.
Wow, that's interesting. In my novel, Secrets in the Shadows, I did a lot of research and I traveled over back to Germany and read so many books and documentaries. What was the research like for you for this novel?
Oh, it was enormous. Luckily, I started when I was 15, by
That's right, because you love
that's right.
Chekhov.
So I was already reading. I've been reading the stories over and over again my whole life. I did a lot of reading of biographies and letters and things when I wrote The Sky's Falling. But I began to read in a different way. I started to read in a way where I was mining the work, his work and his writing. That would be his letters and the stories and the plays, because I know as a writer, things people say and things I think about and things I write in letters make their way into my fiction. So I thought, well, why wouldn't things people around Chekhov thought or said or did make their way into his work? So a lot of the lines of dialogue actually are lines that I took out of letters, lines from stories. I looked at, I read the stories and I went through, for example, read them for the weather. Where does he talk about the weather? What's the what are looking for all those kind of little details that bring the story to life, and then I transpose them all into my novel. So when people say, "Oh, I just really felt I was there," and I said, "Of course you did, because Chekhov wrote it first. It snowed for him, it snowed for me, right?" I put the snow. I mean, I reworded it, changed, but the same thing. But I put little details in that, that were very particular. One example would be, there's a scene in one of his stories where one of the characters goes outside to unbuckle the sledge cover. So, like they would in winter take the wheels off their carriages and then they have to put rails on them because now they're traveling over snow. Like, these are things you don't think about. And then, so obviously they had some kind of cover that would be buttoned over the top of the carriage so that the snow wouldn't get in. So I just had one character go out and unbutton the sledge cover, and bingo, I had like a completely authentic detail that I had to that really stood out for me. They were it's just such rich work. So that was part of the research. And the other part, as I mentioned, was actually going to Russia. And I went there in 2015 when it was still, and I also went to Yalta. So though Yalta never appears my novel, because when I went, I thought I was writing about a different aspect of the story. I did go to Yalta. So that was only about 8 months after the Crimea was annexed by Russia.
Wow.
And so it was I was the only North American. It was a little bit scary. My Russian friend was freaking out about me going there, but it was perfectly safe for a North American white person. There was no problem, and I had guides anyway. So I went to all the Chekhov sites. So I went to Taganrog. So in the novel, Taganrog, that was his birthplace on the Sea of Azov, and that comes up in Masha's memories. And I went to Moscow, of course, and all his houses are there. The house he was born in is there in Taganrog. All these places are museums. Then Yalta. And then I went to Badenweiler in Germany, and that's where he died. And you saw the hotel he was kicked out of when they discovered he had TB, and then the hotel he actually died in. And you could look up and see the room he died in. And they have a museum right there with photographs of his dead body. It's very strange, but that was a European thing at the time, in the tradition of taking the death mask. And I actually stumbled upon, interestingly, out about way on the outskirts of Badenweiler, there was this. I don't speak any German. It's hard to even recognize a single word in German. But on the outskirts, there was this funny little church, and there was a plaque there on that church. And I looked at it, and I could kind of recognize the word Chekhov, and I thought, oh, this is where they brought his body when he died. And then later, I had taken a picture of it, and my friend translated it for me, and I had kind of stumbled upon the place. And I sat in there for a while, asked for help. sorting out this very long story. So that was wonderful, really.
Wow. How long were you in Russia for?
Oh, I was only there for a couple of weeks. Yeah, I'd love to go back.
Wow. What a trip. What stands out the most when you went there?
I loved, so when went to Taganrog, I really liked Taganrog because it's off the beaten track. Not many people go there. And Moscow is fantastic. It's in a way a mirage because the guide, everything looks really old, but apparently Stalin totally rebuilt Moscow. It was destroyed during the war, and then they rebuilt it to look the only way you can tell the buildings from the original buildings is they usually have embedded somewhere, like a hammer and sickle or some little communist motif will be planted somewhere, so it's not the original one. But Taganrog is an old, decrepit, falling down town, and with packs of dogs wandering around, and I just loved it. I just loved it. In the Sea of Azov, you could walk a mile out and it's still only up to your waist, and people would be bathing in there even though it was almost October. They were every day people go out swimming and people fishing, and it looks like what it would have looked. I really loved that. And I had a hotel room, this weird hotel room. I entered my old hotel, would have been there when Chekhov was there. And I go into my room and it's got a Mexican theme, like sombreros, all and ponchos, and like what? So bizarre, really bizarre.
Did that make it into the novel?
No. But it's just one of those peculiar things about traveling. That's why I like going to these weird places, is you see this strangeness and everything is how it really is, not the tourist side or the prettied up side.
What does a writing day look like for you?
Well, I get up and we have a puppy, so that it looks different now. So I get up and I usually have a coffee and feed the dog and try to keep him from bouncing out of his skin, so that I just have my coffee and do my email. And then I have some breakfast. I walk the dog for an hour or so. And then I come back and I start working and I compose. I actually write for about 3 hours. So that goes to about 1 or 1:30, and I have lunch. And then I usually do kind of business things or kind of aspects of writing, or if I'm, doing some editing for someone, I do it in the afternoon. I save my morning it's my best time. So that's my creative time. And then I do all the other, answer the emails, write the report, do the editing, that kind of thing, plan the class, that kind of thing in the afternoon.
What are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on that a children's novel I mentioned about the Lisbon Doll Hospital. And I have some edits come in on a story. I have a bunch of kids' books in production. So edits will come intermittently. Yeah, but I'm pretty focused right now on that. I usually get to a particular point where I'm very focused on something. And then so I'm in a first draft, which is excruciating. So I'm waiting, once I get to the end, I can put it away and go and poke away on some other things. But I'll eventually move back to working. I go back and forth between kids and adults stuff, but I'll start something else maybe later in the summer.
You had mentioned that you were interested in doing other types of art. So do you illustrate some of your own children's books?
No. I just do it totally for pleasure. In fact, recently with the pandemic, I started drawing again, and I started painting. Mostly I have a letter writing project where I write letters to other writers, and I usually inflict little watercolors.
Oh, nice.
It's your bonus. If you write me a letter, you get your bonus watercolor. And, I just totally do it because I want to do something that's not creative, but not a writing related thing. Yeah, I have no ambitions to become an illustrator, but it's been great for me because I'm always barking at students when they take that same class that you took, that the most important thing is discipline, and you don't get good if you're not disciplined. You can only get good if you do it. So, I for years tried to get a drawing practice and I just couldn't do it. And finally the pandemic came, and I managed to make myself draw for 10 or 15 minutes a day. And, then I did improve, and I realized how hard it is to build that discipline. Yeah. So it's just
What
a fun
advice
thing.
do you have for anyone wanting to pursue a writing career?
You mean beyond don't do it?
That's what everyone says. Don't do it.
Well, I feel like it's getting harder and harder. I feel very, very fortunate that I've managed for 30 years now to cobble a bit of a life together. And this is a combination. This is partly because I also write for children, and I do a lot of little freelance things, and somehow together, and my directorship of the Banff program, but that only came out recently. And courses, the one-off courses I teach, non-credit courses, and somehow I've managed to make a living out of it and not end up like in a tenure track job in university. So I actually do write. I write, but it seems that readers are dropping off, and certainly what's really dropped off is the criticism. So there used to be in the newspaper a full section of book reviews every Saturday. It had its own section. 30 books would be reviewed. Now there's hardly, I think last week there wasn't a single review in the Globe and Mail. Sometimes they have these little omnibus reviews where there'll be like 7 thrillers to terrify you at Halloween or something, like these little postage stamp things. Occasionally there'll be a book review. And those are often American books or big name books, not even Canadian books. And most of the papers even stopped doing it. So that is very worrisome, because how are we going to find out about what to read if we don't get the reviews to read? It only forces us to be further prize centered, which is really not healthy at all for any art form. That people just look at the list of what's nominated, and so many wonderful books aren't, and those lists are all just the taste of the people who happen to be on the jury that particular year. And so don't think you're going to have a career at it. Do it because you love it. Do it because it's just something you want to do, and develop a discipline and do it because you want to do it. But don't expect to earn your living off of it. And then if you do, it's a bonus. If you earn some money off of it, it's a bonus. But it is very difficult to do, and more difficult.
I did read that on occasion you offer private mentoring. How does one apply for that?
Oh, you could just reach me through my website. Yeah. And if I can't do it, and I only do it like once or twice a year, and I only work with one person at a time. But I always help forward people, and I know lots of wonderful mentor editors as well. And so I can help direct people to mentors. Yeah.
Any final words you have?
No, other than to say thank you. This was a very pleasant conversation, and you get lots of listeners.
Well, this was really fun, and such a pleasure to have you on A Writer's Life. Thank you, Caroline. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.
Goodbye.
That was Caroline Adderson reading from her latest novel, Russian Sister. For more information about her and where to purchase her books, please check the links below. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to A Writer's Life? And if you want more information about myself and my novel Secrets in the Shadows, visit my website at www.heigabome.ca. For a kinder world, take care of each other. For more